I think it's doing its thing. Okay, I think we are live on every channel.
Cool.
Hey, I'm joined by Phil Wainwright, Diginomica. How we doing?
John, hi. Pretty good. Pretty good. So you caught me just as I was about to head off for a week's vacation. So
Yeah.
and you said, Phil, are you up and about or are you winding down? And the honest answer is both at the same time.
Yeah. Well, you were responding to my messages, so I was like, you might still be a good video victim. And you left a little bit of controversy in your wake, so I wanted to discuss your blog post on MACH-washing, which is like
Hmm.
next generation cloud washing. So we got to like get on alert here on like not mock washing and like getting it right, not getting into trouble because the MACH Alliance is like pointing fingers. You don't want to be on that
Yeah,
list. You
yeah.
don't want to be on that list.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating because, of course, I've been through the whole cloud washing thing right from the start. I fought many battles with people who asserted that they were cloud and clearly had no real understanding of what it was actually all about. And Mark is it's an acronym that was created by the MACH Alliance, which is a kind of trade association that really wants to kind of set the standards. Having seen what happened with cloud washing, they want to set the standards for what is effectively the next iteration of cloud computing. I think once you've moved into the cloud, once you've gone truly cloud native, what then happens is that the old monolithic applications start to decompose. Um, and and it becomes much more a case of like assembling the functionality and the data that you need to get the job done, crossing across those old enterprise boundaries. And it's all about microservices, it's about APIs, it's about cloud-based SaaS. That's the C in Mac, and headless is the H, and so that's why they came up with this acronym. But they're still really effectively defining what is the essence of true kind of I was calling it the platonic ideal last week, because we live in the real world and no one is going to do this perfectly, but you need to have an ideal as to what it should look like, and then everyone can try and approximate to that. And there's a lot of vendors out there that say, okay, we're composable, and therefore we're 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 on this trend, and they haven't got a clue.
Right. And this is actually one of the more interesting shows that I like watch you go to each year. You're in Amsterdam this year for this one. But
Hmm.
tell me a little bit about like how you've seen this evolve because obviously this is pretty next gen stuff. So like are we at the point now where we're seeing broader adoption? Like how have you seen this shift over the last years going to this event?
Um, yeah, so it's kind of interesting because the Mark Alliance, I mean, I happen to know how this all got started because one of the vendors that is a co-founder of the Mark Alliance is Content Stack. And I've known Content Stack before they actually got started. They were previously Build.io, and then Content Stack, which is a headless CMS vendor, really came out of that API centric approach that they developed, and so they are one of a whole generation of vendors that emerged in the kind of 2015, 2016 space when people started to realize that you could take this much more componentized headless approach to web commerce and web content. And one of the pioneers, which is also a Mark Alliance member, is Netlify, who pioneered the whole concept of Jamstack, which is JavaScript, API, and markup approaches to generating a much more headless approach to web content, and they're actually turning into quite an important enterprise infrastructure player. I didn't put this in my article, but I was kind of thinking about Netlify as kind of the AWS of this kind of composable approach to web sites and applications. So the genesis is 2015, 2016, and then MACH Alliance, they started thinking this through, and they founded it like 3 years ago. And then the first conference was 2 years ago, last year, and this was year 2. And we're already seeing some interesting evolution in the maturity of the space. Oh, and I should say, let me add, we are seeing, because this is very much leading edge B2C commerce and content, the consumer brands like Mars, IKEA, Interflora are some of the ones that we're talking at this event. We've had at the last event, we had companies like Lego, Tesco. There's a whole set of retailers and big global brands that have already gone down this route, have junked their Oracle and their Salesforce and their Adobe implementations, gone with this more composable approach. So it has very strong enterprise credibility already.
Wow, I think I just heard the names of some of our partners.
Okay. Yeah.
But isn't that the edge that we live for, right? We all have to stay on our game in this industry against the incumbents and the challengers, and keep our act together. So no one can get too comfortable.
Yeah, and those vendors understand that. I mean, they've been through this ringer over and over and over again. They've all, well, some of them were cloud native, some of them adapted to cloud, and this is another iteration of how the technology evolves, and the way that you do things has to change again, and you either make that transition or you don't survive.
So when we go back to cloud washing, like some of the cloud washing stuff got to be pretty stupid after a while, right? Because every vendor would accuse different vendors of cloud washing. But what I did find helpful about those discussions is it kind of provoked a conversation around cloud architectures, and it's my opinion that you can get yourself into trouble if your architectures don't scale properly for the modern business ends you're trying to achieve. So I think actually the architecture part of these discussions is highly relevant. So do you think that's the same with MACH-washing? Can we, obviously it's a little bit sensationalistic to accuse other people of MACH-washing and stuff, but does it actually provoke a necessary conversation on like what kinds of architectures that we really need now?
Well, I think we should be clear here. I used the term MACH-washing. Yeah, Brian.
Brian likes your wardrobe, man. He's impressed.
I'm just off on vacation, Ryan. John pinged me as I'm already winding down, so I make no apologies.
Hey, I'm wearing
a t-shirt. Dress.
I'm wearing a t-shirt also, and I have no excuse. It's 4:15 Eastern time. It's 9:15 Eastern UK time with Phil joining our broadcast. So he can pretty much, if he wants to wear a bathrobe, he can. But we'll take the shirt actually.
Yeah. I mean, you should thank your lucky stars that I am wearing a shirt and not dressing down even further, to be honest. So yeah, I mean, I use the term MACH-washing. MACH Alliance is not using the term MACH-washing. They're being very careful. They understand that because they're working, as I said, with a lot of enterprise companies. They understand that people have got all kinds of architectures that they have to work with, that the migration is an iterative one, and they don't want to diss people, but they do want to enforce their standards. So to be MACH certified, then you have to conform to what the MACH Alliance has defined, and probably is still defining, to be honest, as the characteristics of true MACH, this platonic ideal I was talking about. And as I referred to in the lead to that story, they have registered a trademark, and they have used that trademark to go out and tell Salesforce and Adobe specifically. These were named by MACH Alliance President Kelly Goetsch, who's the Chief Strategy Officer for Commerce Tools, one of the founding vendors. Those companies have, I don't know who in the company did this, but they have attempted to say they were MACH compliant, and the Alliance has gone out and used their trademark registration to basically say, no, you cannot use our trademark without our certification. And I was quite interested to hear him, because I asked him directly, are you going on the record on that? And he said yes. So they're clearly, very very determined to make sure that this means something. And he specifically, and I wrote this in the article, specifically said that we don't want to go down the path we went down with cloud. And we've seen this with other industry trends as well, of people just seizing the term and making it mean whatever the hell you like, and nobody actually knows as an enterprise which vendors they should be buying from to actually get the full value of the model.
Yeah, I think that's important. And the other thing I'm really interested in, from like a perspective of like future Diginomic content, is basically digging into these terms and how it is you get there, right? Because like a microservices architecture, I don't care if it's the best thing you've ever run on, it's not easy to achieve.
Well, no, it's not, and this is something I think the MACH Alliance needs to do more work on. And I was asking a lot of questions, and I have some, and actually I was asking some questions at AWS Summit the week before as well, which I attended in London, because they're pushing a microservices, a serverless approach to architecture as well. Well, Brian, we expect you to dress up. Your background, is much more corporate than the likes of John and I.
Brian, I challenge you to come on to CAN right now. Not right now, but like in 10 minutes or something, and show that you still have a tie on. Let's see if you can pull that off.
I think, to be honest, John, 10 minutes is too long. That gives you time to go and get a tie and a shirt.
Yeah, well, let's see what he's got. Let's see what he's up for on a Friday night. Anyway, continuing along.
Yeah. So basically, goodness, I've completely lost my thread. What was I ranting on about, John?
Oh yeah, well, just the microservices piece and getting real about what it takes.
Yeah. So I was digging into this because it isn't just the four things that I mentioned. This API thing particularly, you have to drill down to that. And actually, I've had conversations with people at Salesforce and Adobe and asked them about like composable, and the answer that tends to come back is, well, we have loads of APIs. And in fact, Salesforce, their line is basically, well, we have more calls to our APIs than anyone else on the planet, so obviously we're composable. But actually, it's really important what your API does, what you're exposing in the API, what you're not exposing in the API. And this is one of the things that came out of, there was a fascinating session that I attended by a chap called Gregor Hopper, who is on the AWS team, and is really an evangelist for for serverless computing. And he's basically saying, look, there are a whole load of things that you can do when you write an API which actually masks off what you're doing. And if you're going to do this properly, you need to expose exactly what the infrastructure is underneath, so that people can see what's happening and can make different choices if they want to do that. And it's more difficult to write that kind of API. You have to think very carefully about that. It probably means that you have to kind of include more detail in the API than if you're vertically integrating a lot of stuff underneath the API, but you're making it more composable by doing that. So that's one element of it. Another element is some people use the term orchestration, other people use the term choreography, but how you actually bring these APIs together and manage them is a really important part of the story. And I've got some more content that I'm going to be developing out of those two conferences to kind of drill into this further. But there's a lot more detail that the MACH Alliance needs to expose about how to write APIs that give you this truly composable MACH architecture, as opposed to the kind of APIs that monolith vendors are exposing at the moment.
Yeah, I would argue we need to have a more detailed, precise discussion about what composability means too, because I think that word implies that you're kind of really like have this canvas in front of you and doing whatever you want, when in fact you're still working within some limitations of the vendors that you've selected and stuff like that. So I think that term needs a little more work. One thing I'm really curious about is if there was any conversations. Now, I don't want to... Oh, by the way, Brian, I noticed that you got very quiet after you got challenged to come on a camera. I don't know what's going on there with your... Maybe you don't want to put your tie on after all, but...
I think he's just ruffling through his wardrobe at the moment, trying to work out which shirt and tie to put on.
Which swag he's going to grace us with. So I did want to point out, I don't want to like kind of use one sensational story to sort of discredit all of this, but I do think it was quite notable when the enterprise tech press lit up in the last month about Amazon Prime Video ditching its use of microservices. You saw headlines such as microservices sucks, Amazon goes back to basis, return of the monolith. And this one from the new stack, which does a good job covering these things, a blog post from the engineering team at Amazon Prime Video has been rolling out cloud native computing with its explanation that, at least in the case of video monitoring, a monolithic architecture has produced superior performance over a microservices and services-led approach. Now, look, I can understand how a specific use case around Prime Video and specific monitoring things might not work as well for a microservices-based approach. But to me, it does highlight why we need to get much more vigorous in the pros and cons of this discussion rather than just saying that this is the next thing.
Well, I thought it was interesting that people wanted to take sides there, that there was this big rush to say, oh, microservices has been discredited because we have this one use case where people decided to vertically integrate. And that reminded me again of the sort of the discussions that we got back in the days of the early days of cloud and SaaS, when it was, when I remember Charles Phillips, when he was when he was president of Oracle, hauled me back into a briefing at an Oracle Open World event to really kind of because he could see that I didn't kind of accept the Oracle, the way that Oracle was doing cloud. He really wanted me to understand that how Oracle was doing cloud in pods was true multi-tenancy, but doing it without, the word was commingling customers' data with each other. And, this, we're having this same kind of purist discussions now in which people who probably don't fully understand what the MACH architecture is all about are basically trying to muddy the water with different ways of looking at this. That particular example is an example of the trade-off that you make. There are some cases where, in order to get the performance, you want to go vertically integrated, and you still provide that service that is vertically integrated and high performance within a highly composable environment, and people know what you're doing under the cover and why you're doing it, and they can use that service in their infrastructure as a service that they can take advantage of, and they do so because it provides a great service. I don't think that conflicts with the composability message. I think it's just an illustration that for each application you have to make a trade-off between the vertical integration for performance or the composability and the openness, the transparency for having the flexibility and the agility to mix and match different capabilities.
One more thing on this, you talked about the big B2C brands really getting drawn into this heavily. Why do you think this B2C use case is compelling for this?
Well, because the market is changing so quickly, they just they just can't move fast enough on the traditional monolithic platforms. It just takes too long to put new stuff in, and when they put new stuff in, it takes too long to change it again, and so they have to, for commercial reasons, they have to go to a more composable and more flexible and a more agile architecture to actually deliver the experiences that they need to deliver to their customers. And one of the interesting things that one of the people speaking was from Mars, was talking about the fact that now you put ChatGPT and other large language models in generative AI as a user interface, and you've got to become even more flexible in terms of being able to accommodate these different user experiences. And if you're trying to do that on one of these traditional monolithic architectures, you're not able to do it. You simply don't have the flexibility, and that is a real challenge for the names that I mentioned earlier. They have got to really up their game in terms of offering more flexibility on their architecture than their customers are experiencing at the moment.
Great. And you've written a whole series on Diginomic on this. Is that complete now, or is there one more installment? Or do we have the complete?
We've got.
I guess that's always a trick question, right?
Yeah. So I mean, the Mark II conference was the best conference I have been to in terms of I mean, I'm gonna name Emma Keats here, who gave me a schedule of interviews that was the best schedule that any PR person has given me for a conference in
a rare
the past
PR call
5
out.
years.
Nice.
Because there were really pertinent interviews. There were great sessions recommended, and I came away with a list of 8 articles to write, and I've only written 3 of them. So
okay, so the first 3 are there.
The first 3 are there. There's another couple to come on the architecture itself, and then there are some user stories as well.
Brian,
the other thing I would say, that if you want to dig into this, because Mark is just one facet of this kind of whole move to composability, I call it tierless architecture, and if you Google search tierless architecture, you'll find my my piece on Diginomica, which is effectively a manifesto setting out what the whole landscape is and where it's potentially going.
So Brian's been knee deep in a bunch of ESG research, which is really interesting. But he says, on a serious note, this microservices and integration challenge gets really tough when you consider all the data and feeds needed for ESG reporting. Brian, when you come onto the show in a few minutes, you can maybe give us a quick capsule of that. And it turns out Brian was quiet because he was looking for neckties that work with collarless shirts. So that's a pretty good reason, Brian, for taking your time. Yeah, that's a really good excuse.
It sounds convincing. It does sound convincing. We'll
Brian, are you ready for the necktie challenge, man? I'm going to send you.
We have to see the visual evidence.
I'm going to send you, Brian. I'm going to message you a link, Brian. Actually, Brian, I'm going to send it to you on Twitter DM because for some reason I'm logged out. Actually, no, maybe I can do it on LinkedIn. Hang on.
So while you're thinking about that, John, can I just add that one of the articles that is queued up was a fascinating session in which one of these retail brands was talking about how they've not only gone to, in fact, they divested from a larger brand, and they had to build an entirely new global e-commerce site in 4 months, and go live with it and successfully transact for Black Friday. And they manage that using a composable architecture. They have now gone further, and they have built their ERP system in a composable architecture.
Wow. There's another incumbent beware notice there.
Yeah,
we don't hear too much about microservice-based ERP very often. So
Adobe and Salesforce, we've cited by name as vendors that need to think carefully about this, but there's a whole layer of other vendors that also need to be aware of what's going on here, because it's going to reach them. And the ESG is a great example of one of the things that is coming down the track, which just requires so much more flexibility, so much more, so many more data points, so much more and real-time data points coming from your partner and your supplier channel, as well as from your internal organization to really report effectively, and a lot of regulation coming very rapidly that makes this a requirement to adapt. So I do think it's a challenge that the ERP vendors are going to face very, very rapidly. And Brian's Frankensoft concept. Frankensoft is going to walk again.
Yeah, what year was that? I think that might have been 2013 when Brian penned that Frankensoft thing on ZDNet, but then a bunch of vendors ran with it and stole Brian's IP. Brian's still burned about that. Hey, Brian, if you want to come on, I sent you a message on LinkedIn with the back-end login so you can prove that you're actually wearing a tie. So, Phil, I know you want to head off to your vacation shortly, given the time zone issues here, but any further observations on your many events you attended? Was there any other compelling things that you're working on?
Well, I mean, since you mentioned it, I'm just going to say that I am very impressed by what Adobe has done with generative AI in the design space, in terms of being very cognizant of the impact on creators and wanting to provide AI-generated images that do acknowledge the rights of the original creators and potentially compensates them for their contribution. But also, I think Adobe is starting to step up to the challenge of using this technology to make design much more accessible. It's the design equivalent of what low code has done for programming and development in the software field. A whole swathe of people in marketing and other functions can now start to access the kind of design technology that they previously had to kind of get in a queue waiting for the professional designers to create for them. And that can be done collaboratively with the designers setting guidelines and parameters so that the business users can create these things, but still do that within the brand guidelines that the organization needs to maintain. So I think that's fascinating, and I think we're seeing a huge shift in technology, bringing capabilities to people that didn't have that capacity previously, the pace at which this is happening. I've been watching this technology of cloud computing for 25 years now, and it still seems to surprise me with the new twists that come out in terms of how it can automate stuff and help people to kind of achieve more in business. And it's going to be fascinating to see what happens over the next few years.
Yeah, I mean, we could spend a lot of time talking about that. We've all written a lot about that on Diginomica. I'm a little notoriously grouchy about this topic at the moment, but I will say that I got to reluctantly give some credit to Adobe, just in the sense that I thought I still have to look into a little bit around the artist compensation. I'm not sure that is really like exactly what I would have wanted to see, but the whole presentation was pretty coherent in terms of how they were training their image library. And then another headline that came up, I don't know if you saw, around Adobe is so confident its Firefly generative AI won't breach copyright that it'll cover your legal bills. You don't see that type of headline every day. And
Yeah.
to me, what that does is it shows that they've thought through the complexities around the risk management issues a lot better than a lot of other vendors have, and how to communicate those. And that's been one of, I just wrote this piece on SAP customers and generative AI, and one of the things I pointed out there was that risk management is still the biggest question mark that you're going to get from executives around this, especially CIOs and CFOs, and vendors just haven't done a good job of dealing with that. But I thought Adobe was much more well thought in how they presented that. And by the way, they're not currently a client, so there's no reason to sing their praises in that regard. But it is, credit where credit's due is basically what it comes down to. Mm-hmm. Are we ready to see Brian's tie? Here we go.
Yeah, it's there.
Wow.
George McCardo or something like that. But anyway, yeah. I've got
overdressed by Brian Sommer. I got to tell you folks, it won't be the last time, and it's certainly not the first, Brian.
I was
old school.
I was brought up professionally to always be dressed one notch better than my clients. And in y'all's case, it's probably 5 or 6 notches. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm not even sure if we can put it on the same scale,
Yeah, so sorry for the slam, guys, but it's it's almost 5 o'clock on a Friday. I mean, you're getting me at my punch.
No, absolutely, no doubt. I kind of feel like I'm at a job fair interviewing for a spot at your firm. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think I just failed the interview. So I'm going to have to bow out because otherwise I'm going to get in trouble for delaying dinner. So
okay, cool.
So, it's good to catch up, and I will see you guys on the other side of my vacation.
Sounds good, Phil. Thanks for joining. Catch you.
Okay, thank you.
So, Brian.
Hey there, John.
How we doing? Got the tie on? Thanks a lot, man. Looking good.
Somebody had to bring a touch of class to this show, so happy to step in that regard.
No doubt. This is just a little bit of a seat of the pants Friday event. I'm planning on doing more stuff this summer, but I really wanted to just go on tonight. Had a cancellation on the calendar, and so approached a few people. If folks are like, hey, this is a bit of a sausage fest, I do want to go on record as saying the first 2 people I invited were female. So, hey, they had other plans, so stuck with the traditional cast of characters. But no, Brian and I've been wanting to. I don't want to spoil our ESG show because we're going to do a whole show about your ESG findings. But I really did want to tag on to the microservices conversation for a moment. Do you want to just elaborate briefly on your comment on microservices integration challenges and ESG in particular?
Do I have
you said here. Yeah, we can share a screen. Yep, I think so. Yep.
Yeah. And I can pull up a slide. Hold on. Yeah.
We can experiment in real time.
I don't have, present. Here we go.
Yeah, click on present and see what happens. Stay tuned.
All right. Can you see this? Can you see it?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
You got a slide up here? Yeah, so what I'm really trying to show, the challenge on ESG is there's that kind of pinkish box there, which is the way data flows in and around your firm. And it's the traditional kind of view of things from like an ERP system where you got data that's coming out of plants and distribution centers, whatever, and it flows uphill to world intergalactic headquarters. And that's really where the flow of information is for most companies, most systems. And I know, yes, they may have a transportation management system or a supply chain management product or even a CRM one on the value chain side. but they don't collect a lot of the elements that you see listed down below. Things like, does that supplier or that supplier pay a living wage? Do they use forced labor or prison labor? Do they offer child care? There's a whole bunch of elements that you want to track, and it comes from all over this horizontal band here, and there's very little of that information that's actually captured or available today. So when you think about all the systems you're going to want to tap into, it's more than just your production systems, but it's all the systems of all of your supply chain value chain partners. And so if you thought you had a microservice problem of X size in your firm, blow it out over your supply chain value chain, and you're probably looking at like 20X or 100X. I mean, there are some companies, some big multinationals, particularly the ones who sell like in consumer products, they may be talking of millions or tens of millions of participants in their chains. And do you have all the connections that can go get data from them? I doubt it.
Yep.
So
yep.
You guys are the first ones to actually see that slide.
Thanks for that special preview. It's nice to know how easy that is to actually do now, and we can actually do a slide deck do it pretty smooth. That's pretty cool. Not that anyone wants to like view like a PowerPoint deck on a Friday afternoon, but I mean, it's nice to know that we could.
No. Our good friend, mutual friend, Mr. Dennis Howlett, one time he and I were doing a WebEx together for somebody, and it crapped out in the middle of the deal just as Den was coming on. And in a matter of seconds, I mean, literally under 10 seconds, I shared a window on my screen, and it started giving a kind of a presentation like his, and then till he could reestablish connection and join the call a couple of minutes later. But I think I kept the dead air time to under 10 seconds for sure.
I'll bet he was in a great mood when he came back on too.
he was actually in a better mood than you might have thought, but he was fine.
Wow. Okay, he handled it with grace. Nice.
Anyway,
our remote role model indeed, role model for sure.
So that was the. To answer your point, that was kind of where I was coming out with this like microservices deal, because I just don't think a lot of people fully appreciate just how many sources of information need to flow in to get a really good idea of what their environmental, social, and governance kind of footprint is. It's also, anyway, we'll save a lot of that for the show to come. How about that?
Yeah, that seems to be kind of the overriding theme of the spring conference season from my perspective, is the sense that, I mean, there was a lot of bluster around generative AI, but the sort of like common theme from a customer perspective is that sense that their essentially their data isn't ready for the next gen stuff that they want to do with it. And so how do you close that gap? Because until you close that gap, there's just a major disconnect, because you can't plug next generation tools into an architecture that has a shoddy data platform and expect to get a result.
So it's funny, you guys are having this call right now while I'm trying to get my article together for Diginomica on the Canaxis show that I was at in Nashville this week. And I was thinking of that exact point you're bringing up relative to that show, because Canaxis gets these really large, complex, global, multi-tiered, multifaceted kind of supply chain type of customers, big consumer products companies, for example, big global manufacturers with complex products. And those folks, they live and die by their ability to manage disruptions to their supply chain, no matter what causes them. So at one level, the attendees were at that show trying to find out a better way to align execution planning around their supply chain and minimize disruption. But on the other end, they've all got this, the emissions piece in particular of ESG. They're really focused on that as well. And they feel the time is running out for them to get stuff caught up. Related to that, I talked to a bunch of these folks. That was probably the coolest part of being at that show, was rubbing shoulders with so many of these giants in industry. And they were all confiding that Oh yeah, you could tell they're going to be lucky to get their hands just around the emissions piece of the environmental part of ESG, uh, because they're dealing with so much dynamism in their businesses. They're doing mergers, acquisitions, divestitures.
Hmm.
They're having to reposition assets like distribution centers and warehouses. Their supply chain is getting changed on a daily basis because today you're using one supplier, tomorrow, well, you can't, you got to go with somebody else, and that
Right.
just changes up all the metrics on all this stuff. One speaker, I asked her straight on in a uh, Q&A at a session, about how, what are you going to do with all your plants? Because a lot of theirs were built like 50 years ago, and you don't have all the sensors and the IoT and all this other kind of technology to really get a crisp, real time or granular level information. And she just looked right at me and the rest of the audience. She goes, I know the problem. And the only way we're going to get there is to build factories of the future. It basically, the old things, the old plants aren't going to be able to carry the weight, I guess, of what's going to be required going forward.
Mm.
Anyway,
Yeah.
that was a cool show. And you would like this, John, because you hate overly scripted, hand holding kind of
Oh my
content
God.
where customers, have to stand on stage with a vendor representative who's going to say, but you know what, John? Tell us why you chose the award-winning world's greatest piece of, I don't know, supply chain software.
My favorite in those over moderated sessions is the responses to the questions after the customer answers. That's amazing. Oh my God, that is fantastic. The customer will be like, well, we're about a third of the way through the go live. We got 2 years to go. That's fantastic. That's amazing. And it's like, oh my God.
Yeah, and
Any way they can access and improve upon that format? I hope they
oh
do.
yeah. In fact, they let the customers just walk out on stage and talk. They didn't have.
Oh
They
yeah, I
did,
love that. The mic handover where you just hand the mic to the customer and step off. I like that.
right. They did
That's a
that,
good
and in
format.
some
Yeah.
cases, some of the customer, and they gave them ample time. They didn't try to give everybody like all of 3 minutes to talk, because if you let a
Mm.
customer talk longer than that, they might say something that isn't overly flattering. No, they'd let them go in some cases like 45 minutes to an hour.
Wow, cool.
And some of the customers brought 2 and 3 other people from their firm with them to talk. And man, these people had great content. I'm sure somebody worked with them just to make sure like the slides all hung together and they worked through the stuff, but it wasn't that overly massaged, overly polished kind of stuff that just
Mm.
reeks of infomercial. It was exactly the opposite of that. And it was, uh, you know, that was one part of that show. I thought you would have probably stood up and given somebody an award or at least a standing ovation for that. Anyway,
Yeah, no doubt. Isn't it amazing? It doesn't actually take all that much. You just have to step out of the way and let your customers do the talking. It's kind of go
it,
figure. It's a shocking idea. I know,
right.
but
Well, if you've got confidence that you've built a market ready and value creating product, then you should be comfortable enough to step aside and let the customer do the
yeah,
talking instead of
absolutely.
you. And it's the ones who feel they really have to control the message so much. Those are the ones that just gets my spidey sense going. It makes me want to dig in and be a super cynical analyst and take them apart. Not that you've ever seen me do that, but anyway.
Oh no, I've never seen that. Yeah, I don't. It surprises me how many vendors don't really see that. Like I had a lot of times this spring where I interviewed customers, and the interviews were really good, but for whatever reason, the vendor felt they needed to like have a babysitter sitting at the table, and look, it's fine. I don't mind that. But I don't think they realize how powerful it is when they just walk away and just say, hey, just have a one-on-one with our customer.
Mhm.
And it's just such a show of confidence that what, like, we trust that ultimately this was a good project, and even if a few like rough edges come out, who cares? Like, we were successful, and So anyway, I really love it when vendors kind of realize like, yeah, like let's just let our customers do that. And to your point, I mean, you do have to do your homework and make sure that you're delivering, well enough to make those stories shine. But at that point, just step out, let them carry the flag for you. I know it's crazy, but whatever. Anyway.
Well, and given the seniority of the people that spoke and the enormity of the organizations they come from, I'm quite confident these people have great public speaking skills, and the vendor should just turn them loose, get out of their way, and let them go. And that's what they did. So that worked out real well.
It is really interesting. It is really interesting though, because I think this whole generative AI discussion that's been going on throughout the spring. I actually had a snarky strike through in my latest article because I said I described it as the generative AI conference season, and then I struck through the generative AI and put enterprise software because it just basically was like at times you wondered if you were at a generative AI show instead of like an enterprise software event. But I think there's just a whole lot of problems. But one of the big ones was just like this sort of idea that you're going to take this fancy thing, never mind if the generative AI is ready yet, but let's just say it is ready, and just plug it in, and now you go into hyperdrive, like warp speed, like like when the Millennium Falcon goes into like warp whatever, and it's like, well, but actually some of the most important data in the enterprise is not readily available to be accessed in that manner. And manufacturers are a great example because they have, talking to manufacturers like at the recent IFS show and stuff, like they're really interested in AI technology, but at the same time, like they have a lot of old equipment that isn't yet on any kind of it's essentially not communicating. And if it's not communicating, then it can't be a part of the generative AI experience. It can't be a part of things. And, pretty much wherever you look, there is some form of data that isn't ready. And anyway, so hopefully what's going to happen is customers are going to take this as motivation to start tackling these problems and saying, well, why isn't it ready? And can I get it ready? Because, we've been talking about this for years now. So maybe that'll be the one really good thing to come out of all this is customers realizing this shit's going to underperform when I plug it in. Anyway, whatever. We'll find out.
Well, right now I'm amazed at how many people who have tried one little silly thing with like ChatGPT, like fix my resume, and they're all now professed artificial intelligence experts. And the first people I knew that worked with AI and machine learning back in the early 90s, maybe, they were still working with Lisp and other kinds of utilities. And this stuff still, just because somebody watched an episode of MASH doesn't make you a surgeon. And when I see all these armchair AI jocks wanting to lecture me, in their podcast and post about how, how great the world's going to be now that all this AI stuff's going to be out there, I just really wonder, like, I sure hope there's some accountability for these people in a couple of years when all the pipe dreams and the problems they glossed over and so forth come home to roost, because I want to be there wagging my finger at them and going, you idiot, you chumbalone, what were you thinking when you did this? I mean, we can all see that we're way overshot the normal peak on the hype cycle, and we're due for a valley of despair, a trough to come up at some point. I just don't know what the most embarrassing screw up is going to be yet, but I just feel it in my bones. It's going to be spectacular, absolutely spectacular.
Yeah, it feels like Richard Duffy's saying that AI experts are the new generation of crypto bros. Ouch. Yeah,
Richard. Good one.
Indeed. And yeah, I mean, it's going to be an interesting time because I think that this is obviously a cultural phenomenon in a way that, my big beef with the whole Web3 crypto metaverse thing that Richard's referring to is essentially it's a VC fantasy, like with niche audiences that someone decided this is the future for everyone. And the interesting thing about obviously the generative AI stuff is the broad adoption of the technology in various ways. And so that forces us to talk about it, right? Because that's actually people actually using this stuff, and it's popularized this conversation. So we do have to have these conversations. And so what I decided to do is just dig deep into the technology, which is what I'm doing. And the deeper I dig, the more surprised I am at the limitations of this tech, and that they're not going to be overcome in any time soon. It's not like, oh, GPT-4, GPT-5 is going to solve all of this. It's not how it's going to work. And I'm not going to get into all the technology architectural things right now. But to your point, I think one of the mistakes some companies are going to make here is they're going to use this as a headcount reduction exercise. And they're going to say, oh, well, we don't need a content team anymore. We're just going to use this tool to pump out this mediocre crap. And they're going to find out, like CNET did, that it takes, it's embarrassing, and then you have to go through and do all the fact checks and fix all the stuff that's wrong. So there's that scenario, or the service scenario, right? We're going to get rid of this call center. Everything's going to get handled by these human-like bots that understand everything our customers want. So I think, to your point, that's where some companies are really going to embarrass themselves. It's not so much going to be like, yeah, there will be like, oh, my proprietary information got exposed. I mean, that's already happened. But it's going to be more like an overreach of like, oh, we can automate the shit out of this and get rid of all these people. And what they're going to find is it's not that simple. But anyhow, that's what I think.
Well, I share the cynicism because I don't know if you know this, John, but I'm left-handed. And lefties think differently and use different parts of their brain than the rest of the general population. So when a chatbot ever pops up on my computer, I just don't seem to be able to communicate with them or communicate well with them. I mean, I could ask a question like, how's the weather outside? And I get a question about like, Brian, cloud applications were designed for high performance computing. And I'm like, what the hell does that have to do with the weather? I think whether it's the machine learning or whether some of the like the old chatbots, which were programmatically, created or structured by people, there's so much room for things to fail, and I don't see the mechanisms yet, other than people tell me, oh, but you just got to retrain it, you got to do this, you got to do that. And I keep asking questions like, who's going to find all the drop-off points and the screw-ups and the failures? I don't see that kind of technology on the horizon, which makes me wonder, is this stuff, aren't we still talking about being possibly years away from seeing something that can go into a real production mode that actually solves a really decent problem? I mean, yeah, something rinky dink maybe, but even then, I have problems when chatbots come up for just something simple like I want to cancel my car stereo service, streaming service, and it, and I know some of these clowns, they diabolically make it intentionally difficult for you to ever cancel anything. Richard's back in.
Richard says he's seen a few partners soft launch support offerings driven by ChatGPT, but it's just ChatGPT with a predefined syntax to limit the results to the product, and a customer with their own ChatGPT account can get the same result. So, yeah, like I think that's kind of what I'm getting at, because I've spent the whole spring looking into these use cases, and I will say that I've seen some that I think show some level of promise, but so I think Hyam Park of Amalgam Insights wrote a really good post about this, and he was talking about the enterprise application of generative AI, and he referred to it as instant mediocrity. And at first you think, well, that's the biggest insult you can ever level against a technology. But when you think about it, it's not really, in the sense that it does have implications, because sometimes something that's mediocre is actually good enough for certain purposes in the enterprise. So like, to take, for example, like, you got to upload 20,000 product descriptions every day on your website. Well, those don't necessarily have to be that's not like lyrical poetry. It's like product descriptions, or job descriptions could be similar. Like sometimes the fact that you can do it instantly and quickly, whereas a human might take a week to put something out kind of mediocre. So now you can do it much faster. That does have implications, but I thought it was interesting because in the end he said, think of it like an intern. And that's where I really had a problem with this post, because I've had interns, and the best interns actually come up with creative ideas at times. They can actually solve problems, and you can give them something, and it's not just a task, but it's a responsibility around that task. Like you would say, like, create a job description for this new position, go out, post it, review some resumes. It's like it's a more complicated scenario. So describing generative AI as an intern or a virtual assistant is really not accurate. It's really more outsourcing specific tasks. The best analogy might be some form of gig economy outsourcer that's like right at your fingertips, where you could say, summarize these points for me, and boom, you get your task back. But you're still managing the task. That's the point. It's not some revolution in productivity, because you still have to manage it. And anyone who manages anything knows that managing stuff is where the time-consuming part is. Ultimately, you're the one. It's the human in the loop scenarios. You really can't remove humans from a lot of these loops. I'm not sure. Brian was fussing with his technology, so Brian's technically out of the conversation. If anyone in the chat wants to comment for a moment, that's fine. I'll probably be wrapping up in like 10 minutes. Brian's coming back. Yo, Brian.
Yeah, I have
You
no
back?
idea where I went. I think an AI bot took me off the street.
Yeah. So anyway, just wrapping that up, Brian, I think there's a big difference between, like, I think an intern is way too high a compliment for these technologies. I know what Park was trying to do. He was trying to imply that it's a lower skilled individual, but actually I told him on Twitter that it's an insult to some of the best interns I've had, who are like, you could set an intern loose on a project and it might not be perfect, but they would actually complete the entire project. That's not what these technologies do. They don't have that ability. Oh, and an intern can even do something customer facing and like make the customer happy at times. So Richard says it's positioned as innovation, but it's not. And for SME customers, they've seen the application of this tech to answer relatively simple questions to give the customer an answer that, without paying someone for a support contract. Yeah, I mean, I think it is interesting too, because you think about like, oh, and they don't have to wait a long time for an answer, which is exactly the point around instant mediocrity, right? Like you can get stuff in an instant. And at times, like, so if someone lacks, great medical care or great legal counsel, maybe, this technology gives them access to some things, but there's a buyer beware component to that as well.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me of that old definition of the difference between, was it horseshoes and that horseshoes and hand grenades, are two things where close enough is good enough. And that's kind of really where we are with some of the generative AI kind of tools today. Somebody's going to write that down and tweet it. I can feel that coming already.
Oh, yeah. Brian just advocated for the use of hand grenades in certain situations.
Anyway.
Aside from the hand grenades that you lob at vendors during analyst sessions?
Yeah.
Do those count?
One vendor actually came up and reminded me of how I can, let's say, cut to the bone, in like the first 5 words of a question, to an executive. But yeah, I'm good with that.
Yeah, Richard says it's mediocre, but in a lot of scenarios it's correct. And Richard, that is true. And, in a lot of cases you get what you need, but the problem is that there are some cases where you can't afford to be wrong. And I'll give you an illustration of this, Richard, to tell you exactly what I'm talking about. Hi, Tracy. Welcome back. Nice to see you in the chat. Yes, we are still live. This proves it. Looking forward to your salty commentary as we get back onto the video horse this summer. I'll try to be doing this on Friday afternoons, not every Friday, but frequently. Richard, so let me just explain to you kind of like how I look at this from an accuracy perspective, because generative AI is not going to get to 100% accuracy. That's not what it does, because it doesn't understand what it's doing. It's predicting the next word, so that's how the technology is based. But maybe it can get, in some cases, 90, 95, 97%. So I was having some debates with some vendors, because I noticed one particular vendor described this as a revolution in one-to-one personalization. And so I pulled them aside and I said, no, like that's not correct. And I asked for clarification. And when we discussed it further, where we got to was that actually, no, this is more of an advancement in segmentation than true one-to-one. So let me give you an example of that. So for example, let's say a salesperson wants to use generative AI to write more personalized emails to prospects. The problem is that even with a human in the loop scenario, you could miss some very important details on an email that could have really damaging effects to a VIP customer. So for example, you have generative AI send an email to a customer that says, we're really looking forward to seeing you and your wife again at the resort next month. And it turns out that this person's wife has cancer, or even worse, has died or whatever. You can't walk that kind of pseudo personalization back. That has a damaging effect. And so essentially that's an overreach to fantasize that these machines can now conduct one-to-one relationship building. They can't do that, at least not if you have VIP customers like that, because the risk is too great that something would get screwed up. And unlike like some factual error, like spotting something like that's going to be really difficult for a human to spot. It's just going to hit send or go out automatically. But this notion of having more advanced segments makes a lot of sense. And this technology is going to be very good at, especially if your data is updated properly, it's going to be very good at identifying certain segments and certain triggers and getting out messages to people in that group. So essentially, you just have to be wary of this overreach of the technology. It's not that the technology doesn't have use cases, it's just an overreach. So Richard says the disclaimers always have to be there, as you said, absolutely. And you have to find the proper use cases for it. Tracy said, don't you kind of have a person in one-to-one personalization? Well, yes, that's kind of what I feel. And I thought it was interesting that the vendor in question kind of walked back. They walked the language back. And it's not like they didn't apologize for what they said or anything, but they said, yeah, they took it on board, and they said in the future we'll talk more about advanced segmentation. I said, thank you, because one-to-one personalization is really, that's a misleading description of what this tool is going to be good at, in my opinion. I mean, let's see. I mean, if y'all want to take on the challenge and try to send me some one-to-one emails written by an AI, go for it. Let's see how you do. I'm really skeptical. And believe me, I would love to sick an AI on my inbox. I mean, that nothing would make me. I mean, I don't know about you, Brian, but if I could just get a little update from my assistant saying, you had 100 email messages today. I have responded to all of them. Your inbox is at 0. That would be like the greatest friggin' day of my life. Like, I'm not going to fight that.
No. That would be the worst day of my life, because they're all from schlocky PR firms who want to pitch me a briefing. And the worst thing that could happen is some AI tool booking up my schedule with demos of products that I can't spell and have no interest in whatsoever. So no, I don't, I'm not looking for that. That is not nirvana for me. Plus, I already get enough emails from people that misspell my first name. I'm tired of being Brain or Brian with a Y or Byron. I don't need all those. And a real life example, let me put this out there. We had a distant relative pass away recently, and what's been fascinating is all these law firms have been trying to reach out to other family members, and they're combing all these public databases that an AI tool would be trained on.
God.
And I know you're already starting to feel the skin crawl. And so these ambulance chasing types, they've been calling and emailing, and some sent blind FedEx packets our way. And it's fascinating how, number one, they can't find me for some reason. I do a good job of hiding my tracks, I guess, on the internet. But they have found lots of dead relatives and have been mailing them a lot of stuff. And But the inexactitudes of what's going on are incredible because depending on the source, they don't know if somebody's alive or dead. They don't know where they live. They don't know what state
Right.
they're in, how many times they've moved. Did they have any children or not? There's so many things they don't know because there's so much missing, well, out of date information on the internet, and it's not date and time stamped. It's not effective date driven. It's not cleaned up or taken care of. It's not. So if you're going to rely on that kind of stuff, boy, you're standing in quicksand. And to think that you're going to personalize something, man, when I get those things that allegedly are personalized to me, and they've got the wrong name on there, I mean, not just misspelled, I mean, completely wrong, then I just die laughing because that person hasn't lived at this house in 12 or 15 years.
Your anecdote reminded me of one of my favorite scenes in cinema, which is the beginning of The Verdict with Paul Newman, where he's crashed that funeral. He's like at the low end of his career as a lawyer, and he's like handing out his business card at a funeral. It's just like, oh my God. I don't always feel 100% about my work every day, but I feel way better than that. So, and Richard, you're right about this notion that that low level service bot stuff. You say you've seen ChatGPT train itself from better knowledge bases, give a really quick and accurate result, which is why I call ChatGPT a plagiarism engine. But to the point there, like I do think that type of low level service is a pretty good use case for bots, especially if bots have been fed the right information. But the problem, of course, is that you have to design it properly because it's not a one size fits all. Like even accurate information won't necessarily solve my particular problem. And the more complex an enterprise is, the more likely it is that an out of the box answer won't fit the use case that you're dealing with. So part of it you have to have an escalation procedure, which is like where I believe companies are going to get into trouble around this technology because they're going to think we can do a headcount reduction here. And they're not going to look at it like, how can we use this to invest more heavily in more sophisticated support personnel to support the efficiencies we get from dealing with more low level queries. Those are the kinds of conversations that make sense to me. But I think customers are going to abuse these tools. We're already seeing it. Like Barb Mosher Zink wrote a piece on Diginomica about a couple of people from a company that were like, can we fire our content team? And it's like, well, no, you can't fire your friggin' content team. Well, let me put it this way. If your content team writes crap that bad, then yeah, you should fire them anyway, probably, but not because of ChatGPT, just because your content team sucks. If your content team's any good, you can't fire them for this tool. I mean, that's ridiculous.
So, John, anyone watching this at whatever time, I'd like you to go and look up the Johnny Cash song, One Part at a Time, because he talks about how he was working in a GM plant building Cadillacs, and he would steal one major component every year or so, and he would take it home and he was building a car. Now, we all know that car models change over time, and there's a picture on the cover of the most god-awful looking car you've ever seen that was built one part at a time or one piece at a time, something like that. And I think about that when I think about the information that gets pulled together for these AI utilities. They're going to recommend something based on what they've learned across all kinds of different responses. And when they amalgamate this stuff, they may actually create a Frankenstein response that bears no reality of what you actually may encounter out there. And you're going to get the Johnny Cash one part at a time car for an answer when you really need something very focused on your particular.
Brian, Tracy gets your reference. She says she doesn't have to look that up. She says maybe she's old, but she grew up on that stuff. So, we got a special guest.
Yes, we have Roxy, the Wonder German Shepherd, who's wondering, when am I getting dinner? And I know that's why she came in to visit me. She had butted the door into my office.
Well, soon, because we're going to wrap in a couple, but it's good to know that security is always a part of these conversations. In this case, security has 4 legs, but it's still security, so that's good.
Yeah, she'll I'll tell you, if you have a pizza crust in your hand, you don't have a hand anymore. But anyway, yeah, that's the security we've got.
Richard says, agree, which is why uninformed, he's referring to my service conversation. Agreed, which is why uninformed execs shouldn't be allowed to make decisions based on this. They have to see it and use it for themselves, as if that's going to happen. Yeah,
well, I'm glad somebody caught the Johnny Cash reference. That made the whole appearance on here worthwhile. So thanks for that.
Yeah, Tracy, no doubt. No doubt. Tracy walks the line. So just real quick,
as long as she wasn't singing the Folsom Prison Blues when she was doing it. But anyway,
just real quick, Brian, we'll get your reactions to this, but just before we wrap, I just want to go through my most recent post on SAP customers reacting to generative AI, and I talk about highlights from the spring generative AI conference season. Yeah, that was a cynical strike through on my part. We heard way too much generative AI happy talk from the keynote stage. But this is categorically different than the blockchains or magical keynotes from 5 years back. Generative AI is surging on the backs of consumer adoption, not to mention the sharp rise in shadow generative AI within enterprise walls. There was some stat that said like 90% of marketers are toying with this and using it. A risky endeavor that companies must get a handle on. And then I go on and say, but we ran into trouble, and I want to just run through this list. The generative AI risk factors were mostly downplayed, but that's a top question of any CIO or CFO wants answered. The gap between customer priorities and vendors' AI talking points was often quite large. Other areas of tangible progress, such as the impact of robotics on the shop floor, recommendation engines on e-commerce, and automation in finance, missed out on being showcased, even though they are much more mature and therefore applicable at this moment. And then I said enterprise vendors have a terrific opportunity to address some of generative AI's shortcomings around data privacy, hallucinations, government, reinforcement learning, and explainability. But more time is needed, and that wasn't always clear from the enthusiasm of the keynote stage. Brian, your comments.
With one notable exception, I would say that vendor enthusiasm is it's the user conference like it's the most exciting thing at the user conference, except for the marching band first thing on day one morning. It's
it's yeah, you love a good marching band, Brian. Come on, man.
Yeah, because I like nothing more than having bleeding eardrums, first thing in the morning, or having somebody with a bass drum standing right behind me, just beating the daylights out of that thing. Anyway, my reaction on your point is, oh God, I had a great thought. It was based up in the front part of your.
Was it the bullet points or before?
Just before the bullet points. Yeah.
Just before the bullet points. Generative AI surging on the backs of consumer adoption, not to mention the sharp rise in shadow generative AI within enterprise walls, a risky endeavor that companies must get a handle on.
Yeah, let's talk about that. So I think the whole idea of shadow AI is, that's something you could write multiple pieces on, because I know it's coming in at all over the place, and you're seeing it on the external constituents of a company. You're seeing job seekers using these tools to, polish up resumes and everything else. So it's there, and it is in the shadows, and they're not very good tools to detect it. So we always have technology arms races, and for every measure there should be a countermeasure. And right now, no one's talking about any countermeasures to AI driven kind of fraud. That's one. Number two is I was fascinated several years ago, probably about 10 years ago. I studied who's selling big data and where is this stuff coming from? Because nowadays, this would be great stuff to train models on. And I was astonished to find out that in a lot of major companies, it's the chief marketing officer has been selling a lot of corporate customer and other kind of data to third-party firms, because it's a way for them to bolster their budget without having to go to the finance or capital committees to go get money. And it was amazing how much of that was going on in companies. So we've never fully declared a victory on stopping Shadow's technology spend anywhere. It's still going on. And okay, well, good. Richard, I'm glad some of them are starting to pop up.
Richard's starting to see some AI detection tools start to pop up in his LinkedIn, Twitter feeds. Yep.
But I think I have no doubt that that's going on. I just don't think they're at the same level of market awareness or penetration or even maturity as what we're seeing on the other side of things. Anyway, the bottom line is I know there's all this spend. I know there's people selling data. I know people are going to be buying, stuff on the sly and experimenting with it, and it's not going through the real channels it should. I know all of that's going on because I've seen this movie before, and it's going to happen again here in the AI space. That's my reaction to your point.
Yeah, and if you do a Google search on open AI detection tools and write the word fail next to it, you'll see a bunch of headlines like from the spring, OpenAI's new AI detector isn't great at detecting AI. I see one talking about correctly identifies 26% of AI written text. I know there was also some examples in one of these articles on false positives, which is obviously kind of one of the worst things you would want on that. And then a TechCrunch article saying most sites claiming to catch AI written text fail spectacularly. So I think we are definitely going to need AI. We're going to need to sick AI onto AI, but it's not going to be anywhere near perfect. And, so when we design these systems, we're not going to be able to trust the machines to regulate the machines in most cases. We're going to need to design human in the loop scenarios that appropriately catch at least the bulk of these types of gaffes. And the more mission critical your systems are, the more you're going to have to take a hard look at that. And so, that's part of the game here, is to figure out where the use cases are. Now, I'm happy to have that discussion. I mean, people, and I think I'm really being really grouchy about this, is because I'm interested in project success, and I don't want to see companies getting hook, line, and sinker into these technologies before they're ready for prime time. So that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, that's the Ernest and Julio Gallo's School of Technology. We will never release an AI routine before its time. So
exactly. Yeah. Well, Brian, thanks for popping on and proving once again that you have a superior enterprise wardrobe to me and probably most of the people watching this.
Yeah, that was the whole point of me coming on. Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
And you brought some good content too. So that's, fashion and substance is really a excellent combination.
Oh, credit's not here, but I just got my new Whataburger long sleeve fishing shirt. And I could have worn that on the call.
Next time, maybe for the ESG discussion, you can wear that.
On the back of it, there's a big largemouth bass jumping out of the water, getting ready to bite into a Whataburger hamburger. I mean, if that doesn't bring the fish into the boat by the sack loads, I don't know what else will. Anyway.
A couple of comments real quick on the chat. Thanks to Richard and Tracy for keeping it lively. Tracy, at some point I'd like to get you on the show at some point. So thanks for being such a regular, spicing up the conversations. And then Richard, also appreciate. Richard, I got your message around other show content that I might not respond for a few days on that. Just so you know, I'm trying to exhale a little bit from a vigorous show circuit. And Richard's final comments: we have used it to generate some content frameworks for FAQs, which we then refine and add the personal expertise. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll give you one sample use case I would like. I have like a bunch of longer pieces. I'd love to stick a tool like this on those pieces and say, create me a 15-page slide deck based on the high points. I would take that. Of course, I would gut it and change it. But that's because, like, for me, writing's easy and slide decks are hard. For other people, it's the reverse. So I think these tools have a way of filling in our shortcomings in areas where we're not as good. But I don't think I would never be like, there's a huge difference between create a PowerPoint based on this article or series of articles versus do that and send it to my most important prospect. And that's the part that it's not ready for yet. Richard says no problemo. Yeah, it stays salty and spicy. Absolutely. I mean, I mean, if you want an endorsement for those on your LinkedIn profile, I'll see what I can do. I'm not sure if LinkedIn will allow me to put those in there. If that'll help you at all, spice up the profile a little bit, we could try.
Yeah, yeah. Let's see if you can get that by LinkedIn on that one, John.
See, now Richard says it's a great way to start on a blank page, and like, so for me, like that's not really an issue for me, and so like that's not a compelling use case. But like I said, I think it depends on the person and situation. You know, I had an argument on LinkedIn about with a CMO of a vendor that published a blog post written by ChatGPT, and I thought he was like, oh, it was all authored by, I thought it was crap. I thought it was like the worst piece of branded horse manure I'd seen in a long time. And so it really depends on like what you do with that content, and then what your criteria around quality content is. Like, you know, so in the case of Diginomica, for example, and we don't need to talk about this right now, but we actually published a policy that we're not going to use this generative AI for any actual content creation on our site. But that's more of a high bar for like reader trust that we want to keep. I wouldn't necessarily say that all publications need to take such a high bar, but I do think publications should let readers know how they're using these tools, and that's one of the conversations that we still need to have. And Richard says, but never unleash it on a customer unchecked. There you go. And that's the whole essence of these things, is that we need to figure out how to do this without screwing the pooch. And Brent, the Brohammer and the Cowboy. Yeah.
Oh, boy.
Back in the saddle.
That sounds like a drive time radio team. The Brohammer and the Cowboy. We'll be back on the fives with weather and traffic.
Hey, Brent, you see my Enterprise BS detector logo up there? I told you I did some cool logos. That's one of them. It's kind of small, but I got a few different versions of it that are kind of cool. So I don't know that that's actually the name of the show, but Enterprise BS detector. You know, that seems like a good thing to have handy right about now, wouldn't you say? Brent says, don't hold back, Brohammer. I know who you're referring to. Yeah, I just don't feel like calling this individual and their company out, because this is widespread practice. So, you know, but I think if you do a little bit of a search, you could pretty easily find it. I'll give you a hint. Search Brent's videos. How's that for a hint?
So, John, going back earlier on the deal, I think you'd have better luck creating PowerPoint slides if you dressed like a management consultant. That'll get you in the right framework.
Oh, yeah? You think that would help?
You need a tie, a Brooks Brothers suit, and, you know, and some wingtip shoes, and you'll be amazed what will come flowing out, how many 2x2 matrices you'll knock out. I mean, it'll go real quick.
Well, you know, Brian, I do have a pretty nice tie collection. This may strain credibility for you. And I actually wore a red tie to the Diginomica 10-year. There's proof of this on photos too. So,
you know,
you would be so proud, man.
You guys really haven't said much about that event. I'm sorry I didn't get to go, but you know, the news was kind of thin coming out of that deal. But
yeah, you know, I mean, we only issued one press release, Brian.
Mm-hmm.
So probably not up to your standards. Like you have a pretty like high standard as far as whether an event's newsworthy or not, and it definitely was not newsworthy enough for you, I would say. So I apologize for that. Tracy says you could create a LinkedIn profile with a BS logo in the profile and then throw it up there like you do with our comments. Yeah, indeed. Anything to beat the LinkedIn algorithm and make the LinkedIn algorithm work in my favor must be considered. That doesn't turn me into a shill. I just can't do those posts where you tag like 50 or 100 of your friends and colleagues to try to get attention. It just makes me want to vomit. If that's what I have to do to be successful in this industry, then I guess I have to quit today. I really hope I don't have to do that. Anyway.
Yeah, that Enterprise BS logo. I wonder what my attorney would think of that, given my initials. But anyway, that's just another thing.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's Brian Sommer. I didn't even think of that.
Yeah, I've had people calling BS on my name for all my life. But anyway.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, I think we're out of useful ideas for the day. Thanks all for coming. We'll do it again soon. Appreciate it.
All righty. and it's dog feeding time. So thanks for having
Indeed.
me on, John. Take care.
Laters. Appreciate it.